I'm Sarah, 28, and I thought I understood what betrayal felt like until that Tuesday morning when I sat across from my parents at Denny's, watching them casually discuss their European vacation plans while my 5-year-old sister Emma colored happily beside me, completely unaware that her world was about to shatter. My mother pushed the foster care placement papers across the sticky table with the same casual indifference she'd used to slide over a restaurant check, and said with a bright smile, "We've already contacted the agency. Emma will be placed with a lovely family while we're in Italy and France. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It's only for 6 weeks." What they didn't know was that I had been working with a family attorney for 3 months and was exactly one signature away from finalizing Emma's adoption papers. Growing up in Phoenix, Arizona, our family looked picture perfect from the outside. My parents, Linda and Robert Martinez, owned a successful landscaping business that serviced upscale neighborhoods in Scottsdale. We lived in a modest but well-maintained ranch house with a pool in the backyard and 2 cars in the driveway. To neighbors and extended family, we appeared to be living the American dream. What they couldn't see were the cracks beneath the surface that had been widening for years. My childhood was marked by my parents' constant pursuit of the next adventure, the next escape from responsibility. They weren't abusive in the traditional sense, but they were profoundly selfish in ways that took me years to fully understand. Every family decision revolved around what would make their lives easier, more exciting, or more convenient. My needs, and later Emma's, were always secondary considerations in their elaborate plans for personal fulfillment. When I was 7, they left me with my grandmother for an entire summer while they took a cross-country RV trip. When I was 10, I spent Christmas with my aunt and uncle because my parents had decided to go on a cruise. These absences weren't presented as abandonment, but rather as opportunities for me to have special bonding time with relatives. Even as a child, I sensed something was fundamentally wrong with parents who could so easily walk away from their daughter for weeks at a time. The pattern became more pronounced as I entered my teenage years. My parents would disappear for long weekends, leaving me with minimal supervision and vague instructions about taking care of myself. They missed school plays, parent-teacher conferences, and award ceremonies because they were always chasing their next recreational opportunity. I learned early to be self-sufficient, to not expect reliability, and to find emotional support from teachers, friends' parents, and my maternal grandmother who lived across town. Despite their neglect, I excelled academically and socially. I threw myself into school activities, partly because I genuinely enjoyed them, but also because they kept me busy and provided the adult guidance I wasn't receiving at home. My high school counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, became a surrogate mother figure who helped me navigate college applications and scholarship opportunities. She often commented on my maturity and independence, not knowing these qualities had been forged by necessity rather than natural development. I graduated valedictorian and earned a full scholarship to Arizona State University, where I studied social work with a specialization in family services. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was training to help families function better while my own remained dysfunctional. My professors often praised my intuitive understanding of family dynamics and my ability to identify signs of neglect that other students missed. They didn't realize I was drawing from personal experience rather than textbook knowledge. During my junior year, something unexpected happened that would change everything. My mother called me one evening, her voice containing an unusual mix of excitement and anxiety. She was pregnant at 42, nearly 2 decades after having me. The pregnancy hadn't been planned, she explained, but she and my father had decided to embrace this surprise. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope that maybe parenthood would mature them, that this child might receive the attention and consistency I had craved. Emma arrived on a snowy January morning, and I fell in love with her instantly. She was perfect, with dark curls like mine and bright hazel eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. During her first few months, my parents did seem different. My mother was attentive and nurturing in ways I barely remembered from my own early childhood. My father, typically distant and focused on business, would spend hours holding Emma and making silly faces to coax out her first smiles. I visited home frequently during Emma's infancy, drawn by a protective instinct I didn't fully understand. Something deep in my soul knew this child would need an advocate, someone who would prioritize her well-being when my parents inevitably returned to their self-centered patterns. I was completing my final year of social work school and beginning to understand child development theory, which made me acutely aware of how crucial these early years would be for Emma's emotional foundation. The first signs of trouble appeared when Emma was about 18 months old. My parents began leaving her with babysitters more frequently, extending their weekend getaways and expressing frustration with the constraints of having a toddler. They complained about sleepless nights, the expense of childcare, and how Emma's needs interfered with their social plans. During one visit home, I found Emma in her crib at 2 in the afternoon, clearly having been there for hours with a soiled diaper and no food, while my parents nursed hangovers from a party the night before. That incident prompted my first serious conversation with them about their parenting responsibilities. I tried to approach the topic diplomatically, suggesting they might benefit from parenting classes or family counseling. My mother became defensive immediately, accusing me of being judgmental and reminding me that they had raised me successfully. My father dismissed my concerns entirely, saying that all parents needed breaks and that I would understand when I had children of my own. As Emma grew into a curious and energetic toddler, the gap between her needs and my parents' willingness to meet them continued to widen. She was bright and social, requiring constant engagement and stimulation that my parents found exhausting. They began talking about how much easier life had been when I was young, conveniently forgetting how often they had pawned me off on relatives and babysitters. The difference was that now I was old enough to recognize the pattern and mature enough to intervene. After graduating with my bachelor's degree in social work, I found a position with the Arizona Department of Child Safety, working directly with families in crisis. The job was emotionally demanding, but incredibly meaningful. I helped parents develop better coping strategies, connected families with community resources, and in the most serious cases, facilitated the removal of children from dangerous situations. Every day at work reinforced my growing concerns about Emma's environment. My professional training had taught me to recognize the subtle signs of neglect that might not be obvious to casual observers. Emma's developmental milestones were on track, but her emotional responses showed concerning patterns. She was unusually clingy with me during visits, often crying when I had to leave. She would hoard food when it was available, suggesting she had learned not to count on regular meals. Most telling were her advanced self-care skills for such a young child, indicating she had been forced to become independent out of necessity. During Emma's third birthday party, I watched my parents interact with their extended family and friends, playing the role of devoted parents while subtly managing Emma's behavior to maintain appearances. They were skilled at presenting a positive facade during social gatherings, but I noticed how quickly their patience wore thin when guests weren't around to witness their parenting. Emma seemed to understand this dynamic intuitively, becoming quieter and more compliant when we were alone with my parents. That evening, after the guests had left and Emma was in bed, I attempted another conversation with my parents about my concerns. This time, I approached the discussion from my professional perspective, sharing what I had learned about child development and the importance of consistent, responsive caregiving. My mother listened politely, but dismissed my expertise, saying that book learning couldn't replace a parent's natural instincts. My father was more direct, telling me that my job had made me paranoid and that I was seeing problems where none existed. The conversation took an unexpected turn when my mother mentioned their growing desire to travel more extensively. They had been watching travel documentaries and reading about European river cruises, she explained, and they felt they deserved to enjoy these experiences while they were still young enough to appreciate them. The implication was clear: Emma was seen as an obstacle to their dreams rather than a precious responsibility to cherish and protect. Over the next several months, I began visiting home more frequently, ostensibly to spend time with Emma, but actually to monitor the situation and document any concerning incidents. I started keeping detailed notes about what I observed during each visit, a habit developed from my professional training that proved invaluable later. I noted instances of Emma being left alone for inappropriate lengths of time, meals being forgotten, and my parents' increasing irritability with normal toddler behavior. During one particularly disturbing visit, I arrived to find Emma still in her pajamas at 3 in the afternoon, clearly having been in front of the television all day while my parents worked in their home office. She ran to me with desperate enthusiasm, chattering non-stop about everything she had been thinking about since my last visit. The hunger for adult attention was palpable, and it broke my heart to realize how starved she was for meaningful interaction with caring adults. That night, I made a decision that would alter the course of all our lives. I began researching the legal process for relatives to gain custody of children when parents were unable or unwilling to provide adequate care. The information I found was both encouraging and daunting. Arizona law generally favored keeping families together when possible, but it also recognized that sometimes children's best interests required alternative arrangements. I learned about kinship care, a formal arrangement where relatives could assume legal responsibility for children while maintaining family connections. The process required court approval and extensive documentation, but it offered a path forward for protecting Emma while preserving her relationship with our parents. I also researched the requirements for adoption by relatives, discovering that it was possible but required either parental consent or a formal termination of parental rights. My first step was consulting with David Chen, a family attorney who specialized in child custody and adoption cases. His office was located in a professional building near downtown Phoenix, and I remember feeling both nervous and determined as I sat in his waiting room, clutching a folder of notes about Emma's situation. David was younger than I had expected, probably in his mid-30s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle manner that immediately put me at ease. During our initial consultation, I explained Emma's situation in detail, providing specific examples of neglect and my concerns about her emotional development. David listened carefully, taking notes and asking clarifying questions about the frequency and severity of the incidents I described. He explained that my professional background in child welfare would actually strengthen any case I might build, as I had both personal knowledge of Emma's situation and professional expertise in recognizing neglect. David outlined several possible approaches, each with different legal requirements and potential outcomes. Temporary guardianship would give me immediate authority to make decisions about Emma's care, but could be revoked by my parents at any time. Legal custody would provide more stability, but required either parental consent or a court finding that my parents were unfit. Adoption would provide the most security for Emma, but was the most complex legally, and would permanently alter family relationships. We agreed to begin with the least confrontational approach, attempting to secure temporary guardianship through a voluntary agreement with my parents. David would draft the necessary paperwork while I initiated conversations with my parents about the possibility of me taking a more active role in Emma's care. The strategy was to present the arrangement as beneficial for everyone, giving my parents more freedom while ensuring Emma received consistent, loving care. Meanwhile, I began making practical preparations for potentially caring for Emma full-time. I researched child care options near my apartment, investigated pediatricians who accepted my insurance, and started converting my spare bedroom into a child-friendly space. I bought a toddler bed, safety gates, and educational toys, storing everything in my closet until I knew more about the timeline for any custody arrangement. The emotional preparation was more complex than the practical arrangements. I had to honestly examine my motivations and capabilities, questioning whether my desire to protect Emma was clouding my judgment about what would truly be best for her. I sought counseling from Dr. Amanda Foster, a therapist who specialized in family dynamics and adoption issues. Through our sessions, I gained clarity about my deep love for Emma and my genuine readiness to prioritize her needs above my own comfort and convenience.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Dr. Foster helped me understand that my childhood experiences, while painful, had actually prepared me well for this responsibility. I had learned early to be self-sufficient and emotionally resilient, qualities that would serve me well as a single parent. My professional training had given me both practical skills in child development and a network of resources I could access if needed. Most importantly, my relationship with Emma was built on genuine love and mutual trust rather than obligation or guilt. During one of our sessions, Dr. Foster asked me to consider what I hoped to achieve through gaining custody of Emma. My answer surprised me with its clarity and conviction. I wanted to give Emma what I had never received. A stable, predictable environment where her needs came first, where she could develop confidence in her own worth, and where she would never doubt that she was wanted and cherished. I wanted to break the generational pattern of emotional neglect that had shaped my own childhood. As winter turned to spring, Emma's 4th birthday approaching, I began having more direct conversations with my parents about my concerns and my willingness to help with Emma's care. These discussions were delicate, requiring me to express my observations without sounding accusatory or judgmental. I framed my offers to help as recognition of how demanding parenting could be, emphasizing my desire to support them rather than criticize their efforts. My mother's initial response was defensive, insisting that they were perfectly capable of caring for their daughter without interference from me. She seemed to interpret my offers as implicit criticism of her parenting, which triggered her own insecurities about her adequacy as a mother. My father was more pragmatic, acknowledging that Emma was more energetic than they had anticipated and that some additional help might be beneficial. The breakthrough came when I offered to take Emma for extended visits during my vacation time, presenting it as an opportunity for my parents to reconnect as a couple while giving Emma special one-on-one time with her big sister. This arrangement would allow me to assess Emma's well-being more thoroughly while giving my parents a taste of the freedom they seemed to crave. To my relief, they agreed enthusiastically to this plan. Emma's first week-long stay at my apartment was both wonderful and heartbreaking. She adapted quickly to the routine I established, seeming to thrive on the consistent mealtimes, bedtime stories, and focused attention I provided. She was curious about everything in my apartment, asking endless questions and exploring every corner with infectious enthusiasm. Most telling was how quickly she began calling my apartment home and how reluctant she was to return to my parents' house at the end of the week. During that visit, Emma made several casual comments that revealed more about her daily life than any formal assessment could have provided. She was surprised that I kept snacks readily available, mentioning that food at her house was sometimes hard to find. She asked if I would get angry if she woke up from a bad dream, suggesting she had learned not to disturb my parents during the night. Most concerning were her references to being good, so that people wouldn't leave her alone, indicating she had internalized responsibility for adult behavior. When I returned Emma to my parents' house, I observed their interaction carefully, taking mental notes that I later documented in writing. They seemed genuinely happy to see her, but quickly became overwhelmed by her energy and excitement about her week with me. Within an hour, they were directing her to play quietly by herself while they caught up on work and household tasks they had neglected during her absence. The contrast between their reunion and the enthusiastic welcome Emma had received at my apartment was stark. That evening, after Emma was in bed, my parents shared their own observations about the week. They admitted they had enjoyed the freedom immensely, sleeping in, going out for impromptu dinners, and focusing on their business without the constant interruptions that caring for a 4-year-old inevitably brought. They seemed surprised by how relaxed and happy they had felt, as if they had forgotten what life was like before Emma's arrival. This conversation opened the door for more serious discussions about long-term arrangements that might benefit everyone involved. I suggested that regular extended visits might be helpful, allowing Emma to build a stronger relationship with me while giving my parents the space they seemed to need. My mother was initially resistant, concerned about what others might think about their daughter spending so much time away from home. My father was more practical, recognizing that the arrangement had clear benefits for their lifestyle. Over the next few months, Emma began spending alternate weekends and occasional longer periods at my apartment. Each visit reinforced my conviction that she was flourishing with consistent attentive care, and that my parents were happier when freed from the daily demands of parenting. Emma's behavior became more confident and secure, her language development accelerated, and she began expressing her needs and feelings more directly rather than trying to anticipate adult reactions. Meanwhile, I continued working with David Chen to prepare legal documentation that would formalize our arrangement and protect Emma's interests. We drafted temporary guardianship papers that would give me authority to make educational and medical decisions for Emma while preserving my parents' fundamental parental rights. The document was designed to be voluntary and revocable, presenting it as a family agreement rather than a court-imposed solution. David advised me to move slowly and diplomatically, building a pattern of successful care arrangements before introducing any legal paperwork. He explained that voluntary agreements were much easier to implement than contested custody cases, and that my parents would be more likely to cooperate if they felt the arrangement was their choice, rather than something imposed upon them. The strategy required patience, but it offered the best chance of achieving a stable situation for Emma without creating irreparable family conflict. As summer approached, my parents began discussing their long-held dream of taking an extended European vacation. They had been researching river cruises and guided tours, spending hours poring over travel websites and brochures. The timing seemed perfect from their perspective. Their business was stable, they had savings set aside, and Emma was old enough that they felt comfortable leaving her with appropriate care arrangements. During one of these planning sessions, they mentioned their intention to arrange for Emma to stay with a local foster family while they were away. They had contacted the county social services agency and been connected with what they described as a lovely family who specialized in short-term placements for children whose parents needed temporary assistance. The arrangement would last approximately 6 weeks, covering their planned itinerary through Italy, France, and Switzerland. I listened to their plans with growing alarm, realizing they were treating Emma like a pet that could be boarded while they pursued their own interests. The idea of placing my 4-year-old sister with strangers for 6 weeks, regardless of how qualified or caring those strangers might be, was unconscionable to me. Emma had already experienced enough disruption and uncertainty in her young life without adding the trauma of temporary placement with people she had never met. That night, I called David Chen and explained the latest development. He was not surprised, having anticipated that my parents might eventually seek more permanent solutions that would free them from parenting responsibilities. He advised me that this could actually work in our favor, as their willingness to place Emma in foster care demonstrated their inability or unwillingness to provide appropriate parental care. However, he cautioned that we needed to act quickly to prevent Emma from being placed with strangers. David explained that I had several legal options for intervening in the foster care placement. As Emma's sister and someone who had already been providing regular care, I could request emergency kinship placement, which would allow Emma to stay with me instead of being placed with strangers. Alternatively, I could initiate formal custody proceedings based on my parents' abandonment of their parental responsibilities. Both approaches required immediate action and careful documentation. The next morning, I called my supervisor at work and requested an emergency family leave day, explaining that I needed to address a crisis involving my sister. My supervisor, who knew about my ongoing concerns regarding Emma, was supportive and encouraged me to take whatever time was necessary to ensure my sister's safety. The Arizona Department of Child Safety had policies supporting employees who needed to address family welfare issues, recognizing that we couldn't effectively help other families if we couldn't protect our own. I spent that day meeting with David Chen to finalize the legal strategy and prepare the necessary paperwork. We decided to pursue the kinship placement option first, as it would be less confrontational initially while still protecting Emma from placement with strangers. David would file an emergency petition with the family court, requesting that I be approved as Emma's temporary caregiver based on my existing relationship with her and my parents' voluntary decision to seek alternative care arrangements. The paperwork required detailed documentation of my relationship with Emma, my qualifications as a caregiver, and the evidence supporting my concerns about my parents' parenting capabilities. I provided David with all the notes I had been keeping about Emma's visits, my observations of concerning incidents at my parents' house, and professional references who could vouch for my character and capabilities. The documentation was extensive but necessary to support our case. While David prepared the legal filings, I focused on making practical arrangements for Emma's potential placement with me. I contacted my landlord about adding Emma to my lease and ensuring my apartment met all safety requirements for a child her age. I researched preschool programs in my neighborhood and compiled a list of pediatricians who were accepting new patients. Most importantly, I began preparing Emma emotionally for the possibility of living with me full-time. During Emma's next scheduled visit to my apartment, I introduced the topic carefully, gauging her reaction to the idea of staying with me for a longer period. Her response was immediate and enthusiastic. She asked if she could bring all her favorite toys and whether she would have her own special place for her belongings. Most tellingly, she asked if Mommy and Daddy would visit her, or if she would visit them, already seeming to understand that the primary relationship would be reversed. That conversation confirmed what I had suspected for months. Emma would be happier and more secure in my care than she was with our parents. She had formed a strong attachment to me and clearly felt safer and more valued in my apartment than in our parents' house. While this realization was gratifying, it also carried the weight of enormous responsibility. I was contemplating permanently altering the trajectory of 3 lives based on my assessment of what would be best for a 4-year-old child. The following week, my parents called me with exciting updates about their European vacation plans. They had finalized their itinerary, booked their flights, and confirmed their accommodations. Most importantly, from their perspective, they had completed the intake process with the foster family and scheduled Emma's placement for the week before their departure. They spoke about these arrangements with the casual efficiency they might use to discuss boarding arrangements for a pet. As they described the foster family, I felt my resolve strengthening. The family had experience with temporary placements and came highly recommended by the social services agency. They had 2 children of their own and a large house with a dedicated bedroom for foster children. Everything sounded appropriate and professional, yet the idea of Emma spending 6 weeks with these strangers while our parents enjoyed themselves across Europe made me physically ill. I realized that this conversation was my opportunity to present an alternative that would serve everyone's interests while protecting Emma from unnecessary trauma. I took a deep breath and suggested that Emma could stay with me during their vacation instead of being placed with a foster family. I could take extended leave from work, I explained, and Emma was already comfortable and happy in my apartment. The arrangement would save them the foster care fees and give them peace of mind knowing Emma was with family. My mother's initial reaction was skeptical. She worried about imposing such a significant responsibility on me and questioned whether I truly understood what I was volunteering for. 6 weeks was a much longer commitment than the weekend visits I had been managing, she pointed out, and caring for a 4-year-old was exhausting work. I assured her that I had given this considerable thought and was prepared for the challenges involved. My father was more immediately receptive to the idea. From a practical standpoint, my proposal solved their child care problem while eliminating the costs and bureaucratic complications of the foster care arrangement. He seemed pleased that Emma would remain within the family during their absence and that they wouldn't have to worry about her adjustment to strangers. Most importantly, they could enjoy their vacation without guilt or concern about Emma's well-being. After several days of consideration, my parents agreed to my proposal. They would cancel the foster care arrangements and allow Emma to stay with me for the duration of their European vacation. The decision was presented as a family solution that would benefit everyone involved, allowing them to travel with peace of mind while ensuring Emma received loving care from someone she already trusted and adored. With the immediate crisis resolved, I could focus on the longer-term legal strategy David Chen and I had been developing. The 6-week placement would provide an excellent opportunity to demonstrate my capability as Emma's primary caregiver, and to document any concerning communications or behaviors from my parents during their absence.
If they truly saw this extended vacation as more important than their daughter's needs, their actions and words during this period would support any future custody proceedings. David advised me to maintain detailed records during the 6-week period, documenting Emma's daily routine, her emotional responses to different situations, her developmental progress, and any communications with my parents. This information would be invaluable if we eventually needed to pursue formal custody or adoption proceedings. He also suggested that I arrange for Emma to be evaluated by a child psychologist during this period, both to ensure she was receiving appropriate support and to provide professional documentation of her well-being in my care. As my parents' departure date approached, I felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension about the challenges ahead. Caring for Emma full-time would require significant adjustments to my lifestyle and routine, but I was confident in my ability to provide the stable, nurturing environment she needed and deserved. More importantly, this extended placement would give me the opportunity to assess whether permanent custody would truly be in Emma's best interests, or whether I was allowing my own emotions and childhood experiences to cloud my judgment. The week before my parents' departure, they brought Emma to my apartment with several suitcases of her belongings and detailed instructions about her routines and preferences. They seemed genuinely excited about their upcoming adventure, talking constantly about the places they would visit and the experiences they would have. Emma listened to these conversations with polite interest, but I noticed she seemed more excited about showing me her favorite books and toys than about hearing details of my parents' itinerary. During the handover process, I observed my parents' interactions with Emma carefully, noting their emotional distance and apparent relief about transferring responsibility for her care. They hugged her goodbye affectionately, but without the heartbreak I would have expected from parents leaving their 4-year-old daughter for 6 weeks. Emma seemed to accept their departure as normal, suggesting this level of emotional detachment was familiar to her. That first evening alone with Emma in my apartment, I felt the full weight of the responsibility I had assumed. She was no longer a visitor who would return to my parents' house in a few days. She was temporarily my daughter in every meaningful sense of the word. As I tucked her into the toddler bed I had set up in my spare room and read her a bedtime story, I realized that this arrangement felt more natural and right than I had dared to hope. Over the following days, Emma settled into our new routine with remarkable ease. She woke up cheerful and energetic, eager to help with simple household tasks and excited about the activities I had planned for each day. Her appetite improved dramatically when meals were regular and predictable, and her sleep became more peaceful when bedtime routines were consistent and comforting. Most significantly, her language development accelerated rapidly when she had a devoted adult listener who responded thoughtfully to her questions and observations. During the second week of my parents' absence, I received a postcard from Italy, featuring a photograph of the Colosseum and a brief message about the wonderful weather and delicious food they were enjoying. The postcard was addressed to me with a short note for Emma, mentioning that they hoped she was being good and that they would bring her a special souvenir. The casual tone and minimal content struck me as remarkably impersonal for parents communicating with their young daughter after a week apart. I read the postcard to Emma, who listened politely but showed no particular emotional response to hearing from my parents. She was more interested in the colorful stamp and asked if we could look up Italy on the map so she could see where they were visiting. Her matter-of-fact reaction confirmed my growing suspicion that she had learned not to invest too heavily in emotional connections that might disappoint her. By the third week, Emma had stopped mentioning my parents entirely unless I specifically brought them up in conversation. She referred to my apartment as home and spoke about our daily activities with the assumption that this arrangement was permanent. When neighborhood children asked about her parents, she would explain matter-of-factly that they were traveling in Europe while she stayed with her sister. There was no distress in these explanations, just a practical acceptance of the situation. During this period, I arranged for Emma to meet with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a child psychologist who specialized in attachment and adjustment issues in young children. Walsh had been recommended by David Chen as someone who could provide both therapeutic support for Emma and professional documentation of her emotional well-being. The evaluation would help determine whether Emma was thriving in my care and whether any additional interventions might be beneficial. Dr. Walsh's initial assessment was overwhelmingly positive. Emma was developmentally appropriate in all areas and showed strong attachment behaviors toward me. Her play patterns and verbal expressions indicated a child who felt secure and valued, with no signs of the anxiety or depression that often accompanied family disruption. Dr. Walsh noted Emma's remarkable resilience and adaptability, qualities that would serve her well regardless of future custody arrangements. More significantly, Dr. Walsh observed that Emma's relationship with me showed all the hallmarks of a secure attachment bond. Emma sought comfort from me when distressed, shared her discoveries and accomplishments with enthusiasm, and demonstrated confidence in my availability and responsiveness. These behaviors suggested that I had become Emma's primary attachment figure, a role that typically belonged to parents but could develop with other consistent caregivers when parental bonds were insufficient. During one of our sessions, Dr. Walsh asked Emma to draw pictures of her family and describe the people who were most important to her. Emma's drawings prominently featured herself and me engaged in various activities together, with my parents appearing as smaller figures in the background. When asked to explain her drawings, Emma described our daily routines in detail but could say little about her life with my parents beyond general statements about their house and their jobs. Dr. Walsh's professional opinion was that Emma had formed her strongest emotional bonds with me and was thriving in an environment where she received consistent attuned care. While she maintained affection for my parents, her primary sense of security and belonging was clearly centered on our relationship. Walsh recommended that any future custody decisions prioritize maintaining this secure attachment relationship, as disrupting it could cause significant emotional harm to Emma. Armed with Dr. Walsh's evaluation and my own detailed observations, David Chen and I began preparing the formal adoption paperwork. The legal process would be complex, requiring either my parents' voluntary consent or a court determination that adoption was in Emma's best interests despite their objections. Given their apparent willingness to place Emma in foster care and their extended absence, David was optimistic that we could build a strong case for adoption based on abandonment and best interest standards. The adoption petition required extensive documentation of my fitness as a parent, my financial stability, and my long-term commitment to Emma's well-being. I provided employment records, financial statements, character references from colleagues and friends, and detailed descriptions of the home environment I had created for Emma. The paperwork also required Emma's birth certificate, medical records, and documentation of my parents' consent or the circumstances justifying proceeding without their agreement. As my parents' return date approached, I felt increasingly anxious about the confrontation that seemed inevitable. They had been gone for 5 weeks and had maintained minimal contact with Emma during their absence, sending only 2 postcards and making one brief phone call that Emma had received with polite but distant attention. Their behavior during this period provided clear evidence that they saw Emma as an inconvenience to be managed rather than a beloved daughter to be cherished. David advised me to wait until after my parents returned to present them with the adoption proposal, giving them time to readjust to being home before introducing such a significant family decision. However, he also prepared contingency plans in case they attempted to immediately reclaim custody of Emma without considering her best interests or the stability she had found in my care. The legal paperwork was complete and ready to file, if necessary, to protect Emma from being removed from a thriving situation. During the final week of my parents' absence, Emma began asking more frequently about when they would return and what would happen when they came back. I answered her questions honestly but carefully, explaining that we would need to discuss living arrangements as a family once everyone was together again. Emma expressed clear preference for staying with me, but also indicated she would like to visit my parents regularly, showing the kind of mature perspective that broke my heart while making me proud. On the Sunday evening before my parents' scheduled return, Emma and I prepared for their homecoming by making welcome home signs and selecting photographs from our 6 weeks together to share with them. Emma was excited to show them how she had grown and learned during their absence, innocently assuming they would be as interested in her development as she was eager to share it with them. Her excitement reminded me painfully of my own childhood experiences of trying to connect with parents who were fundamentally disinterested in my inner life. That night, as I tucked Emma into bed in what might be her last night in my spare room, I made a promise to myself and to her that I would fight for her right to remain in a home where she was valued and cherished. Whatever legal battles or family conflicts lay ahead, I would not allow her to return to an environment where her needs were secondary to adult convenience. She deserved better, and I was prepared to provide it regardless of the personal cost. The next morning dawned bright and clear, the kind of Arizona day that made everything seem possible and hopeful. Emma woke up early, excited about seeing my parents and showing them all the projects and artwork she had created during their absence. As I helped her get dressed and prepared breakfast for what might be our last quiet morning together, I reflected on how profoundly these 6 weeks had changed both of our lives. I had discovered that I possessed not only the practical skills necessary for parenting, but also the deep emotional capacity to put another person's needs consistently ahead of my own. Emma had flourished under consistent loving care, in ways that confirmed every professional instinct I had developed about children's needs for stability and attention. Together we had created a family bond that transcended biology and was rooted in genuine love and mutual respect. As I loaded Emma's artwork and projects into a bag to take to my parents' house, I caught sight of the adoption papers David Chen had prepared, sitting ready in my desk drawer. By the end of the day, I might be in a position to present my parents with a choice that could change all of our lives forever. Emma deserved a home where she was the priority rather than an afterthought, and I was prepared to provide that home regardless of the challenges ahead. My parents arrived home on a Tuesday afternoon, their faces tanned and their luggage filled with souvenirs from their European adventure. Emma and I were waiting in their living room when they walked through the door, and I watched carefully as they greeted their daughter after 6 weeks apart. My mother hugged Emma warmly but briefly, immediately launching into stories about the places they had visited and the amazing food they had eaten. My father ruffled Emma's hair affectionately but seemed more interested in sorting through their mail and checking their phone messages. Emma showed them the artwork she had created during their absence, chattering excitedly about the activities we had done together and the new skills she had learned. My parents listened with polite attention, making appropriate noises of approval, but I could see their focus was already shifting to the practical matters of settling back into their routine. They thanked me profusely for caring for Emma, expressing genuine gratitude for the freedom my help had provided, but there was an underlying assumption that things would now return to normal. Over the next few days, I observed the family dynamics with professional clarity and personal heartbreak. Emma tried repeatedly to connect with my parents, showing them her drawings, telling them stories, and seeking their attention with the desperate enthusiasm of a child who had been temporarily abandoned. My parents were kind but distracted, their attention constantly pulled toward business matters, social obligations, and the remnants of vacation planning they still needed to address. Within a week of their return, the familiar patterns had re-established themselves. Emma was spending long hours entertaining herself while my parents worked, meals were irregular and often forgotten, and the structure and attention she had thrived on during our 6 weeks together had vanished. I received several phone calls from Emma during this period, her small voice asking when she could come visit me again, and whether I could bring her the books we had been reading together. The contrast between Emma's vibrant energy during her time with me and her subdued demeanor at my parents' house was stark and heartbreaking. During weekend visits to my apartment, she would transform back into the confident, curious child she had been during our extended time together. She would spend the entire first day reconnecting with her toys and favorite spaces in my apartment, as if reassuring herself that this refuge still existed and welcomed her. My parents seemed relieved when I resumed taking Emma for regular weekend visits, but they also appeared somewhat resentful of her obvious preference for my company. My mother made several comments about Emma being spoiled by too much attention during the European trip period, suggesting that her difficulty readjusting to their household was the result of my overindulgence rather than their neglect. My father was less critical but clearly frustrated by Emma's increased neediness and her frequent requests to call or visit me. During one particularly tense family dinner, Emma asked innocently why she couldn't live with me all the time since she was happier at my apartment. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I watched my parents' faces carefully as they processed this direct statement of preference from their 4-year-old daughter. My mother's expression cycled through hurt, anger, and defensiveness before settling on a forced smile. My father looked uncomfortable and avoided eye contact with both Emma and me. My mother's response was swift and decisive. Emma lived with them because they were her parents, and parents knew what was best for their children.
I was Emma's sister, and sistering was different from parenting, she explained with strained patience. Emma accepted this explanation with the resignation of a child who had learned not to argue with adult pronouncements, but I could see the confusion and disappointment in her eyes. That evening, after Emma was in bed, my parents confronted me about what they perceived as my undermining of their parental authority. My mother accused me of encouraging Emma's preference for my household by being permissive and indulgent in ways they couldn't sustain on a daily basis. My father expressed concern that Emma was becoming too attached to me and that this dependency was unhealthy for a child her age. I listened to their concerns with professional composure while my heart raced with anger and frustration. Everything they described as problematic in Emma's relationship with me were actually signs of secure attachment and healthy child development. Her preference for predictable routines, consistent attention and emotional availability weren't character flaws to be corrected but basic needs that were being met in my care and neglected in theirs. When they finished expressing their grievances, I took a deep breath and shared my own observations from the past several months. I spoke carefully and professionally, using my training in child development to frame my concerns in terms they might understand.
Emma's behavior patterns, her emotional responses, and her developmental progress all indicated a child who was struggling with inconsistent caregiving and emotional neglect. My parents reacted defensively to my assessment, accusing me of using my professional training to pathologize normal family dynamics and create problems where none existed. My mother was particularly offended by my suggestion that Emma's needs weren't being adequately met, pointing to their comfortable home, Emma's wardrobe of nice clothes, and the toys and activities they provided as evidence of their adequate parenting. I realized during this conversation that my parents genuinely didn't understand the difference between providing material necessities and meeting a child's emotional needs. They saw parenting as a series of tasks to be completed rather than a relationship to be nurtured, and they measured their success by external indicators rather than their child's internal well-being. This fundamental misunderstanding of child development explained many of the patterns I had observed throughout Emma's life. The conversation ended with my parents asking me to scale back my involvement in Emma's life to allow their family to function normally without outside interference. They weren't forbidding me from seeing Emma, but they wanted me to stop providing the consistent caregiving that had allowed her to flourish during their absence. They seemed to view my relationship with Emma as competition rather than support, and they wanted to re-establish their primacy in her life, regardless of the impact on her well-being. I left their house that night, knowing that the time for diplomatic solutions had passed. My parents had made it clear that they saw Emma's attachment to me as a problem to be solved rather than a resource to be valued. They were willing to sacrifice Emma's emotional security to protect their own egos and maintain control over their household. The child's best interests were secondary to adult pride and convenience. Over the following weeks, I watched helplessly as Emma's progress began to reverse. Her sleep became restless again, her appetite decreased, and her previously expanding vocabulary seemed to stagnate. During her weekend visits with me, she would spend increasing amounts of time processing her confusion about why she couldn't stay permanently in the place where she felt most secure and valued. Emma began having behavioral challenges at my parents' house that she had never exhibited during our extended time together. She became clingy and demanding, throwing tantrums when my parents tried to leave her with babysitters and resisting bedtime routines that had been effortless when I was caring for her. My parents interpreted these behaviors as confirmation that my involvement had been harmful, not recognizing them as symptoms of attachment disruption. During this period, I maintained regular contact with David Chen, updating him on the deteriorating situation and providing documentation of Emma's regression since returning to my parents' primary care. David was not surprised by these developments, having seen similar patterns in other cases where children were removed from stable placements and returned to inadequate caregiving situations. He advised me to continue documenting everything and to be prepared to act quickly if the situation became more serious. The crisis I had been dreading came on a Thursday evening in October. My parents called me in a state of panic, explaining that Emma had been expelled from her preschool for aggressive behavior toward other children and defiance toward teachers. The school director had recommended counseling and suggested that Emma might need a more structured environment to address her behavioral issues. My parents were overwhelmed and angry, blaming me for creating problems that hadn't existed before my period of intensive involvement. I drove to their house immediately, finding Emma in her bedroom, tear-stained and exhausted from what had clearly been hours of emotional upheaval. She ran to me with desperate relief, clinging to me with the fierce intensity of a child who had been drowning and suddenly found solid ground. My parents watched this reunion with a mixture of resentment and helplessness, clearly recognizing that Emma found comfort with me that she couldn't access from them. After Emma calmed down and fell asleep in my arms, my parents and I had the most honest conversation we had ever shared about their parenting and Emma's needs. My mother finally admitted that she felt overwhelmed by the responsibility of caring for a 4-year-old and that she had hoped Emma would be easier as she got older rather than more demanding. My father acknowledged that they had made mistakes and that their approach might not be working, but he was uncertain about what changes would be appropriate or sustainable. This conversation opened the door for me to present the adoption proposal that David Chen and I had been preparing. I explained that Emma's behavioral problems were symptoms of attachment disruption and that she needed stability and consistent caregiving to heal from the emotional trauma she had experienced. I proposed that I formally adopt Emma, providing her with the security she needed while allowing my parents to maintain a relationship with her as loving grandparents rather than struggling primary caregivers. My parents' initial reaction was shocked silence. The idea of voluntarily relinquishing their parental rights had never occurred to them, despite their obvious struggles with the responsibilities of parenting. My mother's first concern was about what people would think about parents who gave up their child to a sibling, while my father worried about the legal and financial implications of such an arrangement. I had anticipated these concerns and was prepared to address them thoughtfully. The adoption could be presented as a family decision made in Emma's best interests, with extended family members supporting the arrangement that allowed Emma to receive the specialized care she needed while maintaining close relationships with her biological parents. Many families made similar arrangements when circumstances required creative solutions to complex challenges. From a legal standpoint, David Chen had prepared comprehensive documentation showing that the adoption would provide Emma with stability and security while protecting everyone's rights and interests. My parents would maintain visitation rights and could continue to be involved in Emma's life as much as they wanted without the daily stress and responsibility they had clearly struggled to manage effectively. Most importantly, I emphasized that this arrangement would give Emma what she needed most, a home where she was the priority, where her emotional needs were understood and met, and where she could develop the security and confidence that would serve her throughout her life. The behavioral problems they were struggling with would likely resolve once Emma felt truly secure in her living situation. My parents asked for time to consider the proposal, and I agreed to give them space to process this major decision. However, I also made it clear that Emma's current situation was not sustainable and that something needed to change quickly to prevent further emotional damage. Whether through adoption or other formal custody arrangements, Emma needed stability and consistent caregiving to thrive. During the waiting period, Emma continued having significant behavioral challenges at my parents' house while demonstrating age-appropriate behavior during her visits with me. The contrast became so pronounced that my parents' babysitters began refusing to care for Emma, and my parents found themselves unable to maintain their normal social and business activities because of Emma's distress when left with others. My mother called me one evening in tears, admitting that she felt like a failure as a mother and that she didn't know how to help Emma feel secure and happy. This conversation was the first time I had ever heard my mother express vulnerability about her parenting capabilities, and it opened the door for a more authentic discussion about what would truly be best for everyone involved. I reassured my mother that recognizing when a child needs different care arrangements was actually a sign of good parenting rather than failure. Many loving parents made difficult decisions to ensure their children received what they needed, even when those decisions involved personal sacrifice. The goal was Emma's well-being, not protecting adult pride or maintaining appearances. My father was more practical in his approach, focusing on the logistics of how an adoption arrangement would work and what their ongoing relationship with Emma would look like. He seemed relieved by the prospect of stepping back from daily parenting responsibilities while maintaining a loving relationship with Emma as a special uncle figure. He had always been more comfortable with Emma in small doses and seemed to understand that his limitations as a primary caregiver didn't reflect his capacity to love and support her in other ways. After 2 weeks of consideration and several family meetings, my parents agreed to support the adoption process. They would voluntarily relinquish their parental rights and support my petition to adopt Emma, with the understanding that they would remain important figures in her life, and that I would encourage ongoing relationships between Emma and both sides of her extended family. David Chen was delighted with this resolution and immediately began finalizing the adoption paperwork. The legal process would take several months to complete, but Emma could move in with me immediately under a temporary guardianship arrangement that would provide stability while the formal adoption was processed. The timing was perfect, as Emma's behavioral challenges had made it impossible for her to return to preschool, and I could provide the one-on-one attention she needed during this transition period. The night before Emma moved in with me permanently, I couldn't sleep, thinking about the enormity of the responsibility I was undertaking and the joy of finally being able to provide Emma with the security she deserved. I had prepared extensively for this moment, but the reality of becoming a single parent to a traumatized 4-year-old felt both thrilling and terrifying. Emma's transition to living with me full-time was smoother than anyone had expected. She seemed to relax immediately once she understood that my apartment was now truly her home and that she wouldn't have to leave after a few days. Her behavioral problems disappeared almost overnight, replaced by the curious, affectionate child I had come to know during our extended time together. We established new routines that worked for both of us, with Emma attending a small, nurturing preschool near my apartment and spending her afternoons with me exploring museums, parks, and libraries around Phoenix. She began speaking about our life together with confidence and ownership, referring to our apartment as home and making plans for future activities with the assumption that we would be together permanently. My parents visited regularly during Emma's first month with me, and these visits went remarkably well. Without the stress of daily caregiving responsibilities, they were able to enjoy spending time with Emma and to appreciate her growth and development without feeling overwhelmed by her needs. Emma was affectionate and happy to see them, but there was no anxiety about their departures or confusion about where she belonged. The adoption process proceeded smoothly through the fall months, with court hearings and social worker evaluations confirming that the arrangement was in Emma's best interests and that all parties were committed to making it work successfully. Emma participated in age-appropriate conversations about the adoption, expressing clear understanding that she would continue to love both her new mom and her birth parents while living permanently with me. By Christmas, Emma had been living with me for 3 months, and the transformation in her well-being was remarkable. Her preschool teachers commented on her improved social skills and emotional regulation, her pediatrician noted her excellent physical development, and Dr. Walsh documented her progress in forming secure attachments and processing the changes in her family structure. Most importantly, Emma herself was flourishing in ways that confirmed every professional instinct I had developed about children's needs for stability and consistent care. She woke up each morning with enthusiasm for the day ahead, participated eagerly in household routines and responsibilities, and went to bed each night with the quiet confidence of a child who knew she was safe and loved. The legal adoption was finalized on a snowy January morning, exactly 1 year after Emma's 4th birthday. The courthouse ceremony was simple but meaningful, with my parents present as supportive witnesses to the formalization of an arrangement that had already proven successful for everyone involved. Emma wore a new dress for the occasion and carried a small bouquet of flowers, understanding that this was an important day that made our family official. Judge Patricia Morrison, who had overseen our case from the beginning, commented on how well prepared and thoughtful our adoption plan had been and how clearly it served Emma's best interests. She praised my parents for their courage in recognizing that Emma needed different care arrangements and for their ongoing commitment to supporting her well-being, even when it required difficult personal decisions. As we left the courthouse that day, Emma's small hand in mine, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. What had begun as my attempt to protect a neglected little sister had evolved into something much more profound, the creation of a family based on love, commitment, and the determination to put a child's needs first regardless of personal cost. The months that followed were filled with the ordinary joys and challenges of single parenthood. Emma started kindergarten with confidence and curiosity, made friends easily, and continued to thrive in an environment where her emotional needs were prioritized alongside her physical and educational development. My parents remained actively involved in her life, taking her for special outings and including her in extended family gatherings, while respecting the boundaries and routines I had established. My relationship with my parents had also evolved in unexpected ways. The process of working through Emma's adoption had forced us to have honest conversations about family patterns, parenting philosophies, and the ways childhood experiences shaped adult relationships. While we would never be close in the traditional sense, we had developed mutual respect and a shared commitment to supporting Emma's continued growth and happiness. Professional colleagues often asked me how I managed the transition from being a child welfare worker to being a single adoptive parent. The answer was both simple and complex. My professional training had prepared me to recognize Emma's needs and to advocate effectively for her well-being, but the personal relationship we had developed was what gave me the motivation and courage to take on such a significant responsibility. Emma, now thriving in kindergarten and secure in our family structure, occasionally asked questions about her early childhood and the circumstances that led to her adoption. I answered these questions honestly but age-appropriately, emphasizing that all the adults in her life had worked together to make sure she had what she needed to be happy and successful. She seemed satisfied with these explanations and showed no signs of confusion or distress about her family history. The most rewarding aspect of our new family structure was watching Emma develop the confidence and security that had been missing during her early years. She approached new challenges with enthusiasm rather than anxiety, formed friendships easily, and expressed her needs and feelings clearly rather than trying to anticipate adult reactions.
These changes confirmed that the difficult decisions we had made were yielding the outcomes we had hoped for. As Emma's 5th birthday approached, I began planning a celebration that would include both sides of her extended family and acknowledge the journey we had traveled together over the past year. The party would be a recognition not just of her birthday, but of the successful creation of a family structure that prioritized her well-being while maintaining important relationships with her biological parents and extended family members. Looking back on the events that had led to our current happiness, I was struck by how many small decisions and chance encounters had contributed to this outcome. My decision to study social work, my growing awareness of Emma's needs, my relationship with David Chen, and even my parents' European vacation had all played roles in creating the circumstances that allowed us to find this solution to a complex family situation. The story could have ended very differently if any number of variables had been different. Emma could have been placed with strangers during my parents' vacation, potentially severing the attachment bond we had developed. My parents could have refused to consider alternative custody arrangements, forcing a contested legal battle that would have been traumatic for everyone involved. I could have lacked the professional knowledge or personal courage necessary to advocate effectively for Emma's needs. Instead, we had navigated through a difficult situation to create something beautiful and sustainable, a family structure that honored everyone's needs and capabilities, while prioritizing the well-being of the most vulnerable person involved. Emma had gained the stability and security she needed to thrive. My parents had found a way to remain involved in her life without being overwhelmed by responsibilities they struggled to manage, and I had discovered a capacity for love and commitment that surprised even me. The adoption had also changed my perspective on my own childhood and my relationship with my parents. Understanding their limitations as caregivers had allowed me to forgive the emotional neglect I had experienced, while also ensuring that Emma would have a different experience. Breaking the cycle of inadequate parenting felt like a gift not just to Emma but to future generations of our family. 2 years after the adoption, I received an unexpected phone call from my cousin Maria. She was planning a surprise 50th birthday party for my mother and insisted that Emma and I attend. The entire extended family would be there, she explained, including relatives from California who rarely visited Arizona. My mother had been asking about Emma constantly, Maria added, and everyone was curious about how the adoption had worked out. I felt my stomach tighten as Maria described the elaborate plans. The party would be held at an upscale restaurant in Scottsdale, with formal invitations and a photographer to capture family memories. My parents had apparently been telling everyone how proud they were of the adoption decision and how well Emma was thriving in my care. The narrative they had created painted them as selfless grandparents who had made a difficult but wise choice for their granddaughter's benefit. Emma, now 6 years old and confident in her place in our family, was excited about the party when I mentioned it to her. She loved seeing her extended family and had fond memories of my parents' visits and special outings. To Emma, the adoption was simply the way our family worked, and she saw nothing unusual about having a sister who was also her mom and birth parents, who were now her loving grandparents. The day of the party arrived with typical Arizona sunshine. Emma wore her favorite purple dress with sparkly shoes, and I chose a simple but elegant outfit that would photograph well. As we walked into the restaurant, Emma holding my hand with excitement, I spotted familiar faces throughout the crowded dining room. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends, who had known me since childhood, were all there, their conversations stopping momentarily as they noticed our arrival. My mother looked radiant in a coral-colored dress, surrounded by flowers and gift bags. When she saw Emma, her face lit up with genuine joy, and she swept Emma into a warm hug.
My father stood nearby, beaming with pride as he introduced Emma to relatives she didn't remember meeting before. They spoke about her with obvious affection, describing her accomplishments in kindergarten and her artistic talents with the enthusiasm of devoted grandparents. During dinner, the conversation flowed easily around topics of family updates, career changes, and travel plans. Emma charmed everyone with her polite manners and bright personality, clearly comfortable in this gathering of people who loved her. My parents basked in the compliments they received about Emma's development and their wisdom in supporting the adoption arrangement that had given her such stability. As dessert was being served, my uncle Roberto stood up to make a toast honoring my mother's birthday and the family bonds that brought everyone together. He spoke warmly about my mother's devotion to family and her courage in making difficult decisions that put children's needs first. The room erupted in applause, and my mother smiled graciously while my father squeezed her hand supportively. Then my cousin David, a successful attorney from Los Angeles, raised his glass again. He had something else to share, he announced with a broad smile. He had been so inspired by our family's adoption story that he wanted everyone to know about the remarkable coincidence he had recently discovered while reviewing some old legal files. My blood ran cold as David continued speaking. While researching inheritance law for a client, he had come across records showing that my parents had actually been in the process of permanently relinquishing custody of Emma through the state foster care system when I intervened with the adoption petition. The original plan hadn't been temporary care during their vacation, as everyone believed, but permanent placement that would have severed all family ties. The restaurant fell silent. David, oblivious to the bombshell he had just dropped, continued explaining how fortunate it was that I had stepped in when I did. Without my intervention, Emma would have been adopted by strangers and lost to our family forever. He praised my parents for ultimately supporting my adoption petition, even though they had initially planned a very different solution to their parenting challenges. Emma looked up at me with confusion, not understanding the adult conversation but sensing the sudden tension in the room. I squeezed her hand reassuringly, while my mind raced. My parents' faces had gone pale, and they were staring at David with expressions of horror and panic. The carefully constructed narrative about their selfless decision-making had just been shattered by documented legal evidence. My Aunt Carmen was the first to find her voice. She asked David to clarify what he meant about permanent relinquishment, her tone sharp with concern. David, finally recognizing the impact of his revelation, stammered that perhaps he had misunderstood the legal terminology, but the damage was done. The truth about my parents' original intentions was now public knowledge. I stood up slowly, Emma's hand still in mine, and looked around the room at the faces of people who had known our family for decades. These were the same relatives who had watched me be shuffled between caregivers throughout my childhood, who had wondered privately about my parents' priorities but had never spoken up. Now they were learning that history had nearly repeated itself with Emma. My voice was steady when I finally spoke. David was correct about the legal records, I confirmed. My parents had indeed been in the process of permanently surrendering Emma to the state when I filed for adoption. The European vacation had been their farewell trip before relinquishing all parental rights and responsibilities. They had planned to return to a child-free life with no ongoing obligations or connections to Emma. The room erupted in shocked murmurs and uncomfortable shifting as family members processed this information. My mother attempted to interject, claiming that David had misunderstood the legal documents and that their intentions had been misrepresented. But I continued speaking, my professional training helping me present the facts calmly and clearly. I explained that I had documentation of their original foster care arrangements, their communications with social services, and their signed preliminary agreements for permanent relinquishment. The decision to support my adoption petition had come only after they realized that keeping Emma in the family through my custody would be less socially damaging than having her disappear entirely into the foster care system. My father finally spoke up, his voice defensive and angry. He accused me of betraying family loyalty by exposing private matters in public and claimed that their thought processes during that difficult time had been complex and deeply personal. The adoption had worked out well for everyone, he argued, so the details of how it came about shouldn't matter now. But Emma's well-being had always mattered, I replied firmly. She had deserved honest, committed parents from the beginning, not adults who saw her as a burden to be eliminated when convenient. The family had a right to know the true circumstances that had led to our current arrangement, especially since my parents had been taking credit for a decision they had actually opposed. My cousin Maria asked the question that was on everyone's mind: what would have happened to Emma if I hadn't intervened? The answer was uncomfortable but necessary. Emma would have been placed with strangers, likely after spending time in temporary foster care while permanent arrangements were made. She would have grown up knowing nothing about her family history or her biological connections. Emma tugged on my hand, asking quietly if we could leave soon. She was tired and confused by the adult conversation, and I realized that this public confrontation was exactly the kind of traumatic exposure I had worked so hard to protect her from. I picked her up and prepared to leave, but my mother stood up suddenly, tears streaming down her face. She admitted that they had made mistakes and that their original plan had been wrong. The European vacation had been an escape from responsibilities they felt unprepared to handle, and the permanent relinquishment had seemed like the kindest solution for everyone involved. They had convinced themselves that Emma would be better off with adoptive parents who truly wanted children rather than struggling with grandparents who felt overwhelmed. The restaurant was completely quiet now, with only the sound of my mother's quiet crying and the distant clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Emma wrapped her arms around my neck and whispered that she wanted to go home. I nodded and moved toward the exit, but my uncle Roberto called out to ask what this revelation meant for our family going forward. I paused at the restaurant door and looked back at the room full of relatives who had just learned the truth about my parents' character and priorities. Emma was my daughter now, legally and emotionally, and nothing could change that fundamental reality. My parents could continue being loving grandparents if they chose, but everyone now understood the real circumstances that had created our family structure. The drive home was quiet, with Emma falling asleep in her car seat while I processed the evening's events. The truth about my parents' original intentions was finally public, ending years of carefully managed narratives about their selfless decision-making. More importantly, Emma's security was absolute and unshakable, regardless of any family drama or social complications. At home, I tucked Emma into her bed and sat quietly in her room, watching her peaceful sleep. She was safe, loved, and thriving in ways that confirmed every difficult decision I had made on her behalf. The confrontation at the restaurant had been painful but necessary, finally bringing honesty to relationships that had been built on carefully constructed lies. My phone buzzed with messages from family members seeking clarification, offering support, or expressing their shock at the evening's revelations. I turned it off and made myself a cup of tea, sitting in my quiet living room, surrounded by the evidence of the life Emma and I had built together. Photo albums, artwork, school projects, and books filled the spaces where my parents' approval had once seemed so important. The next morning, Emma woke up her usual cheerful self, chattering about the party and asking when she could see her cousins again. The family drama that had seemed so significant the night before barely registered in her world, where security came from consistent daily care rather than extended family dynamics. Her resilience reminded me why all the difficult conversations and legal battles had been worthwhile. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.